Amy Hamilton, welcome. Thanks for being here with us at Catholic Answers.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure and honor.
I've been a little bit stressed about talking with you because it seems like there's so many different directions we could go in a conversation. And I guess the way I kind of formulated it to myself was, it feels like to me that we're at a moment of cultural crisis, and then it feels like a lot of your life is right at the heart of that cultural crisis, both your lived experience as a human being and your intellectual life. Does that seem like a fair characterization to you?
Yes, I do think that's a fair characterization, and it's nice to know that you're stressed as well, because I was stressed about.
Hi.
This is only like my second podcast type interview thing, maybe my third, so it's not. No, I'm not the norm for me. So.
If people get to know you, you're going to get to be old hat at this. I saw the one you did with Marco and his co-host, and I thought it was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
And I've been looking forward to talking with you, but I literally don't know where to start. So let me ask you this. How about we start here? Let's start with that idea of cultural crisis. You'd agree with my characterization that we're in a cultural crisis?
Without a doubt, absolutely.
And the sexual revolution is part of that cultural crisis. Where would you place it as far as precipitating factors?
Yes, I mean, I think that, I love Carl Trueman's work, where he traces this intellectual trajectory and what's actually been happening culturally to set us up for this moment that's gone far back beyond, we think it started in the 60s, or it started with contraception and things like that. But the intellectual foundations and the questioning of faith and the decentralization of a shared vision of what a common good would look like, and what a utopia would look like, right? What are we striving for in terms of the common good for the society that we want to live in? I think that the technological advances and just prosperity, other factors, kind of let that, what was simmering in the intellectual and in the heart background of those in the church and outside the church, that kind of precipitated, and you just have this kind of technological explosion of possibility with, contraception and actually things that predate contraception. I love that, he pointed out in his book, Strange New World, but also just the research I've done, maybe it was in The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, but that you actually couldn't have had this level of promiscuity, not just without contraception, but without effective antibiotics. And so the sexual revolution was facilitated as much by these wonderful gains, right, in medical technology, where we overcame STDs. And yet you look at the effect of that. Look at the effect. We have record high sexually transmitted diseases, and it sets a record year upon year. Just look at the CDC data for the US. Look at the number of babies being born with resistant syphilis, things like that. Now we've got several strains emerging that are, resistant to these antibiotics. You're getting super strains of syphilis and other returning with a vengeance, because the technology overcomes only a little part of it for a season, but the consequences always are going to come, because we're fighting against the human body and the human person. And so I remember well, I was a sexuality research fellow I was at the conference in New York. This is when I had done my dissertation. And so I was amidst the sex researchers, and, every single one of them was aligned with a very different worldview about what the common good would look like, right? And the common good for my colleagues was that we would be liberated from the limits of our human bodies, even things like our immune systems, in order to enjoy what for them was like the sexual smorgasbord. And that's not an unfair characterization, because for them that was the highest good. It was this sense of this individual liberation to do sexually whatever you want, while being able to overcome the consequences of that, because we're embodied, right? So it's a war against our own incarnational reality. And that's why it's such a divisive thing going on. And so Dr. Richard Pollard was one of the He's a gay identified psychiatrist. He had done groundbreaking studies with twin studies with J. Michael Bailey, showing that, homosexuality can't be 100% genetic by any means. We knew that, 50 years ago with the twin studies. So he said, even if we found a silver bullet for AIDS tomorrow, something else would come along, because we're simply not designed. Our bodies are not designed. Our immune systems are not designed to receive so many influxes of, different, body fluids from different people. So you, as sex researchers, you're the hope of the future. You have to find ways to overcome these limits so that we can enjoy the full freedom of our range of expression. So I think that you've just seen, like, there's been these, these advances intellectually and technologically. You have the, STDs, which allowed promiscuity. Then you get the contraception, which takes care of, sadly, the unwanted pregnancies, prevents, or of course, that's connected to abortion. That's your final contraceptive. So you get all these, you get societal changes, you get legal changes, you get technological advances. And now we're 4 or 5 decades in to where you're seeing literally the fragmentation of the human person down to their very body and soul, a division with the, quote unquote, gender, transgender medicine, and all of that. So I just feel like the cultural crisis is the human person doesn't even know what the good is anymore.
No.
And we're designed to live in family and in community rooted to reality, which is that there's a creator and we have a relationship to him, and he ordered relationships within the family and others. And now we are so atomized into this individualistic pursuit of happiness, which happiness doesn't get gotten by being pursued. I love to quote Viktor Frankl. It's like, happiness is something that has to ensue from you giving yourself to something greater than yourself. It's not something that can be attained by pursuing it for its own sake. Well, and that's where we're at.
All right. So because now I listen to that and I think, well, this intersects with your life as far as your own experience as a girl, a young woman with the same-sex attraction and moving into the kind of identity crisis, and then that. So it intersects with you there. It intersects with faith life, but it also intersects with, and weirdly, I'd like to start here. Maybe it seems weird, but I think it might be helpful. It intersects with your life as a scholar, as a scientist, as a linguist, because one of the things you have to end up talking about, if you want to talk about all those other things, is ideological science, is that the science itself has been captured. So I guess here's the thing. You describe this whole movement of the impacts of technology in our life. We have Jesus himself saying, "Woe to you, rich." Well, in a certain sense, we can't handle. The reason he says, "Woe to you, rich," is we can't handle infinite choices. We just can't. That's not part of the human personality. How do the social sciences become completely captive to the maniac side of this, to the unreal side of this, and how did they not end up being somehow saying to us, whoa, hang on, because that's not reality. Do you see what I'm saying? Well, how did the sciences, especially the social sciences, get captured by unreality?
Well, I think that if you every scientist, right, every researcher comes as an embodied person with a worldview. And I think that's what has gotten, we've kind of tried to create this neutral area where, science is neutral. Well, the facts are neutral, right? The facts can be neutral, but how you interpret those facts or what you do with those facts is always going to be animated by who's looking at it. Does that make sense? So, yeah. So, for instance, if you look at, a major player in starting the reimagination of America and beyond, but kind of the reimagining the sexual ethic with Alfred Kinsey, right? How can he possibly in the 1950s published data on infant orgasms recorded by an adult who was performing masturbatory exercises on those infants. How does he publish that in a table, and not immediately have just police at his door, police at his door, or outcry?
Right.
Well, how does he do that? Because these are numbers in a table. That's objective data. And so somehow by putting them in columns in a scientific paper where we've done a study, right, and we've obtained this data, somehow that kind of whitewashes what's actually being documented there. And so the science as a pursuit of truth, right? But we can get the same facts, and then different values animate what we think we should do with those facts. And so there was a lot of suppression when they were I'll give you another example. There's a lot of suppression when they were trying to get same-sex marriage legalized. And of course, a lot of the contention is this will harm children. They were actually, looking at a very small percentage of children being raised in some kind of gay-identified parental structure or same-sex coupling. But that was the contention, right? That these children have the same kind of outcomes, so that this is not harming any kind of child, and you're going to actually strengthen the family structure for these children who are actually quite a minority, right? And the overall scheme of things. But there was a lot of suppression, actually. There actually were differences, right? There were clear differences.
You mean differences in outcomes from, like, say, a same-sex parenting and parents who were the biological parents of the child?
Right. So, for instance, one thing they always said was, they're no more likely to identify as gay or lesbian or engage in homosexual behavior, as if they were, that's a static number of percentage of quote unquote kids who are going to grow up and be identified with those identities or engage in those behaviors, as if they were raised by an intact household. Well, that absolutely wasn't true. And they knew that wasn't true. But there was a lot of suppression of the differences because they wanted to whitewash it and say, no, this is really okay. These are equal structures for children. And my point is that the values suppressed actual research that they were showing, right? Let's just say that you look at that data. Okay, and so let's let the data speak and say it's accurate data, and we've obtained the fact that there's differences for children. Well, one person's my values will look at that and say this is evidence of God's created order, and a child comes from a mother and a father. Therefore, they thrive best if they are with a mother and a father. Those sex differences within the household are a balancing thing. Both male and female contribute unique things to children's development, and so forth. So for me, I look at that and say, this is objective evidence for the natural order that God has created. And someone who's coming from, a gay rights perspective will look at the same data, and they can, even if they acknowledge it, they can say, see, we need to do more to change the structure of society, to give extra support to make sure that these disparities go away. Does that make sense? So I'm saying that part of it is, so the science and the objective facts are always going to require an interpretive body. What do we do with that?
So starting from the choice of the study that you're making, then to the interpretation of the data, and then to the judgment about what to do about that data, all of that is values.
Yes, because look at my, professor, Dr. Pillard. He knows the data. He knows the objective reality that human bodies are not designed for this many partners. With the influx and the challenges to our immune system, we were not designed for this. But the values animating someone who makes sexual, freedom, quote unquote, the libertine value, then that has to be overcome, because that in itself is an oppressive injustice, right? The women who, don't view fertility as a gift, but if fertility as a burden or an unfair, oppressive burden on women who do obviously much more of the work in terms of labor and reproduction and so forth. Both are necessary, but this design of God, is it a beautiful reality that we need to learn to work with and honor in order to flourish in society, or is it an oppressive structure, even an embodied oppression that through technology and even abortion we have to liberate ourselves from?
All right, so I see what you're saying, but here's what I see in the church, because I spend my life in the church, basically talking with people who are in ministry and whatnot, reading about ministry and all that. What you see overwhelmingly in some parts of the world, less in others, are lay people, priests, bishops, religious, who say, look, Jesus taught at a time before we knew all this stuff about what that the social sciences have revealed. So what we need to do is reinterpret the teaching of Jesus in the light of this social science. And it seems to me there's a real naive acceptance of social science, of the conclusions of social science. There's not a willingness, or maybe it hasn't occurred to people to critique the social science, to say, well, wait a second, is that science? Is that science in the sense that E equals MC squared is science, or is that an ideologically driven science? And should we really be using that to reinterpret the words of Jesus so that we say the church needs to change its sexual teachings?
So I just want to point out that, I have a chapter in my book is They're Blinding You with Science. I was a child of the 80s, Thomas Dolby, and I still can see the video of his hair blowing up in the lab. But that's absolutely what's being done, is that the church is being bullied and, treated as if the church is benighted in some way because of the last, survey data, social science data of the last, 40, 50 years, which are completely infused with values. Look at how is that going for us? Is society flourishing? Is it leading? So there's two things I want to say, but the first thing that is really important for Christians, for professing believers in Jesus Christ, he is the incarnate God-man. All the fullness of the Godhead dwelt in him in bodily form. Okay? So if you're saying that the God-breathed scriptures, the revealed word of God, and millennia of Christian teaching, consistent, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, consistent teaching, which starts changing with this sexual revolution, right?
Yeah.
What you have just done is you have made your God not worshipable. He's not worthy of worship. If there's some new revelation that his creatures can find out about that he doesn't know about when he reveals the created order.
Yeah.
You cannot do that. When people critique Paul, Paul in the Pauline epistles, and say, oh, well, Paul didn't know and didn't understand about sexual orientation. He didn't understand about, in that culture, there were only exploitative same-sex relationships, and he didn't understand about a loving, committed gay relationship. This is the apostle who was chosen and had revelations in the seventh heaven, had revelations of the mystery of God, where the Gentiles were included. The eternal plan of salvation was revealed to him. And you think he doesn't know, or there's some big section of human sexuality and human relationship that's not there. You think that God really created a third category of person that he doesn't mention in any of his scriptures, right?
No, explicitly excludes that idea in some parts of Scripture.
And that would war against the incarnation, the temple of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
It wars against the human person to engage in same-sex relationship. For women, it's much less damaging, simply because of physiologically, but it's barren. So we think barrenness is no big deal, right? We choose barrenness most of the time with look at our fertility, the women's fertility.
Yeah.
God gave women 2 decades at least of fertility if everything's working right. And we want to have unlimited sexual activity and maybe get a child or two when, at a time of our choosing, usually much later than our fertility is even cooperating with at this point. I mean, look at what's going on. So, and in the male, there is literally no other sexual activity you can do that's more damaging than a male to male sexual activity. I mean, you look at the CDC. I'm looking at high risk behaviors, and it's not even high risk behaviors. There's not even like certain same sex practices that are listed. Homosexual behavior is a high risk behavior.
Yeah.
And so,
if it was a food dye, for example, that was doing that much physical damage to people, that food dye would be banned. It's because it's sexual that it's in a different category, that we won't listen to the science about it.
Absolutely, because again, that's a birthright, and that's the hedonistic, libertine culture, like you do you. And again, we've made pleasure and sexual expression, and we've been duped. That's the thing. So I really want to caution. I really want people to look at what you're saying. When you say there's some new revelation about the human person, and so Jesus didn't change it when they came to him and said, look, divorce, all of this is too hard, whatever. No, he went back to creation order. But the other thing he didn't have to clarify is because this kind of behavior is destructive, and he didn't list out every possible thing. So there's no new revelation because the human body hasn't changed. Yeah. The second thing is, that's theologically. And then second, let's look at the actual outcomes. If you're wanting human flourishing in a society, are women happier? Are men happier? Are children happier? But with all of what we've done? No, they're not.
But people will push back on that. They will say that's because we haven't gone far enough, because the project of liberation there's constantly one more layer of liberation to uncover. And so your cis heteronormativity still hasn't been overcome. So you would think you'd look at the world and say the sexual revolution has resulted in these things, and just talk about sexual violence or violence against children or suicidality. You just go down the list of social ills, and all are worse, and in most cases much worse than they are before the sexual. You say, well, we did something wrong. But people will not do that. They will not say we did something wrong. They will say, look, that's because we have still not overcome, and then they'll have some kind of quasi-scientific word like heteronormativity.
Right, but that's basically your word for we haven't overcome reality.
Heteronormativity is reality. In other words, that's what we are.
No, I'm telling you that there really is, and that's why, you do the best scholarship that you can, right? And you try to expose, how the science is being misused. But then there's also just a spiritual reality. This is not so much as convincing the head as a conversion of the heart, because if I recognize these things, I have to make a change, right? I have to acknowledge that the individual self-expression project has failed. Now you see excellent examples of that. And I just love when I see, open intellects looking at what's going on and saying, hey, something's gone very wrong here. So one of those is a British feminist journalist. I don't know if she was a journalist, but Louise Perry. Okay. And she wrote The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. And so I think this came out in 2022, and it's excellent. And so she's one that looks at the carnage. The women mostly, like she worked with rape crisis and women's shelters, and she's just looking at the reality. Okay, so this denial of reality, the denial of male-female differences, right? The denial of the physical embodied differences of male and female. How is that working, right? How is it working out for women? for men. And so her, all of her chapters list the harms that we've talked about, but she comes to a different conclusion. Her end chapter is get married. That's the best chance for you to have a man who will, protect and care for your children. It's the best thing for your children. And we can basically encourage men to be two things: dad mode or cad mode. That's what she called it. And right now the society supports cad mode, and so all of those social incentives, have just dissipated and been eroded. And so I just love it when I see, Louise Perry coming to the same conclusions that Brad Wilcox comes to, and in his recent book from HarperCollins, Get Married.
Yeah.
I mean, just data after data, because this is not a structure made with human hands, right? This is God created humans, and he created the structure for human flourishing. And that is, for the majority of people, that's within marriage. And now you have at least a third, probably, of these young adults not going to marry at all. And that's a tragedy.
For some reason, when you're young, you're vulnerable to edgy ideas, and I do think that this old-fashioned idea is never going to be more appealing. There's very few young people who the light goes on early, which means that we have a society of regret. That's what we live in now, is a society of adult regret. And it may be at 35 that the regret sets in. It may be at 40, but we all, the men and women who have delayed marriage and procreation, filled with regret. Men and women who have done things to their body because of transgender, surgeries or hormones or whatnot, regret. People who have had abortions or multiple abortions, just regret. But it's almost like you can't communicate that to the 14-year-old pop music fan. It's so hard to and now that those generations, unlike maybe, I'm older than you are, but in my generation, at least even the child that was the child of divorce had images of healthy marriages around. They were there. You could see them. You might be, well, that's not for me, or you might feel defeated about it, but at least it was there. Now many of them have never seen it, or have very rarely seen it.
Right.
So I don't mean to make it all hopeless, but it feels a little hopeless.
If I can share a personal story from that, because I think that we need hope. We need hope in our current situation. You're literally seeing just the fragmentation, not the fragmentation of the cohesion of the social fabric, but again down to the fragmentation of the human person. I wrote in an article on the transgender movement, just like part of what we could do is part of it is just pray and repent for these children. This generation didn't come from nowhere.
No, right.
They're made. They're our children. And so I said, we've sown the whirlwind. We've sown the wind in the sexual revolution, and now we're reaping the whirlwind that's now filled with the fragmented identities of our sons and daughters who will acknowledge themselves to be neither. I mean, it's just the devastation at this level. So in my own life, just from my personal story, I was in a deep season of healing where the Lord was really bringing up. So we haven't gone into my personal story, but I was lesbian identified and dealt with same-sex attraction from age 12 when it really started emerging. And I tracked that with 2 wounds. I was given up for adoption as an infant. So, of course, that creates a primal wound a wonderful mother and father, adoptive family, but that doesn't change the tragedy and the primal wound that was there. So that was very clear in my life. And then at age 10, I was repeatedly sexually abused over a long summer stay with my grandmother, where my uncle lived on the same property. So those two things combined, well, then it makes sense that a couple of years later, in a fallen world, it's a very potential outcome that I was emerging with being drawn to females and with an aversion to males. So, but anyway, when I was 27, this is going back to your point about regret. When I was 27, the Lord had done a lot, but I was really just facing like the wounds in my life. And so I had a list of things that I would have written differently in my story if I had been the one. I would never have been. And I love my family, so I wouldn't change it now, right? But back then, I was like, what child would say, "Oh yes, give me to strangers, let me be completely separated"? So I wouldn't necessarily have chosen adoption, right? Certainly wouldn't have allowed sexual abuse to impact my life. Did not ever want to deal with same-sex attraction, which I had dealt with, gosh, at that point, for 15 years, because I was 27. So all of these different things had happened. Really a number of things. I mean, there was even, when I went for help in the Bible church, when I was trying to come out of same-sex relationships, I was paired with a lay counselor who was twice my age almost. So I was 20 and she was 38, and she led me into the longest lesbian relationship I ever had. So from 20 to 25, was completely with this one woman in this distorted relationship. So there was a lot where I just was like, why have you allowed the things that you've allowed? Yeah. And I was saying I wasn't angry. I'm sure that I was a little bit angry, but I really did just, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. Like, I just need a perspective on my life that's higher than my own. But I had this list of things that I would have done differently. I would have written differently. Lord, why did you allow this? Why did you allow this? And it was near my 27th birthday. So I was, feeling so hurt that I didn't want to celebrate. And I was going away for 3 days to this mountainside retreat. And I live in Texas. Okay, let's face it, it's not a mountain. It was the hill country. But for us, it was a place called
Texas
Mountain. So I have to be honest about that. So, but it was still beautiful. And my friend gave me this card, Kareen, and she gave me a card, said, "I've really been praying for you. And I feel like Joel 2, I think it's 25, 23 through 25 is for you." And that's the familiar promise where the Lord says, "I will restore the years the locusts have eaten." And then he says, the creeping locust, the gnawing locust, the stripping locust, the flying locust. There's 4 kinds of locusts, And it was very striking because I had just said to my friend, look, it's not just been one thing in my life. It's been thing upon thing upon thing. And so I love I will restore the years the locusts have eaten, but I focused on that last part. She had actually written out all the locusts. And I was like, look at that. It's thing upon thing upon thing.
Oh,
right?
Isn't that something? Yeah.
So anyway, I went and I went and I had this list in my hand, and I was at this prayer mountain, and I just went out and I was like, okay, I'm going to have it out with the author of the script, okay, Lord, I'm here. I want to hear from you. And I started praying, and man, as soon as I started praying, this storm started coming out. It was like the wind was rising and it was whipping, but it was a dry storm. And I started seeing lightning, but my voice was raising with the wind, and this, and finally I just had to be silent because the Lord was showing this. Lightning was streaking across the sky, finger lightning coming down. It was the most amazing. And it was, I was up on this high hill, right, Prayer Mountain, looking at the West Texas hill, the west side of Austin, the hill country in Central Texas. And so it was so gorgeous that I had to just shut up. And so the first night I got the message. It was, be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I'm God. But I did pray, and I prayed for 2 more days, and I read Job and was reminded that God is not going to give an account to me, but it's I who will give an account to him, right? but it was really beautiful. So I hadn't heard anything. I, was just silently praying, and I was kind of submitting. So I was right about to leave on the third day. There's a wooden cross on the outside. And I went and I was reading, I think it was Psalm 103, and it was, as high as the heavens are above the earth, so high is the Lord's love and compassion on those who fear him. And so I just kind of thought, Lord, it's not just your ways that are higher, your ways are higher, right? Isaiah 55. So I don't understand, but it's your love that's higher. So I just said, I haven't heard anything else. I know I'm just to be still and to know that you're God. And I laid down a list at the foot of the cross. I said, I choose to trust you, though I do not understand. I do not understand your ways. And immediately, sigh, as clearly as I've ever heard anything in my heart, I heard the Holy Spirit whisper, love would not allow what love could not restore.
Oh, man. Wow.
Love would not allow what love could not restore. And I'm telling you, that's the promise of the gospel for every believer. Knowing God is better than knowing why. There's a peace that passes our ability to understand. And so that has carried me through. And when I look at the carnage of today, I know that even if it's, someone's detransitioning, someone's coming off of divorce, someone's coming off of abortion regret, love, the God who is love, is the author of that person's story. And if they turn to him, he's got redemption beyond measure.
Amen.
And
amen.
so that's the hope that drives me. I also love the Psalm. Oh gosh, I'm blanking, but you have been a shelter, Lord, in every generation. You have been our dwelling place. You have been, and he doesn't change. And so Jesus Christ is the hope of this generation as well. And the Father has abundant redemption and restoration. And that's what we need to communicate. So I do get overwhelmed at the amount of just carnage. But I know that he has shown the way for restoration in my life, and it's for all who call upon him. That's his promise. And so, but I want to steward what God's done in my life to obviously warn people away from, fly the wrath to come, avert the destruction that comes from these choices. Yes, God can redeem wherever you are. He will redeem. He can redeem, but also we're responsible for training up the next generation, for directing believers, new believers. What's the way to go? What's the way to walk in? And clearly, the ways of human flourishing are to obey the human nature that he's given us and what he's set out as good. People treat his commands like there's some oppressive,
right.
Oh, you can't have that candy and slap your hand. It's ridiculous. I have set two ways before you. One leads to life and the other to death. And that's just the reality. There are two ways, the Didache. There are two ways. There are two roads.
Yep.
One leads to life, the other to destruction. And so if you look at the sexual revolution, where has it led us? Where has it led us? It has led us to destruction. And yet, again, without a conversion of heart, for those that are committed to still believing, being deceived, the highest good is that a person, a human being, male or female, should be able to choose to remake themselves in their own image, right? So again, we should be able to harm our bodies with all manner of not toxic chemicals and cross-sex hormones and surgeries that lead to insane complications. For what? Look at the social studies, the social science that they're actually trying to push. You will always see that these never look at objective health outcomes. especially with transgender medicine. They can't possibly look at objective health outcomes. It's always a snapshot in time of a mental health reported improvement.
Yeah, so it's a
Right.
subjective thing that's taken. It's
It's
not. It's not a lifelong following of that person to see.
exactly,
But
exactly,
right. So a moment of
exactly,
euphoria or
exactly.
a temporary relief
Right.
of an obsession.
Yeah, it's decontextualized from the rest of life, right? So, 6 months after you had your breasts amputated, in your double mastectomy, they'll have a 6-month follow-up. Are you happy? Oh yes, I'm happy. Right. Well, I can show you the articles. Breastfeeding. Top surgery regret. Breastfeeding. Look at these women. When they 5 years down the line, 3 years down the line, or they start having children, or there's no arc there. It's interesting when they always talk about reducing suicidality, which of course I'm for. I want that. Of course, I want every human being to flourish. They're made in the image of God, loved by God. God is calling them to himself. May it be. I want to reduce suicidality. I know all about that. Having major suicide attempt in my teens and experiencing all of the same things that are currently being reported. Guess what? Encouraging teen sexual activity is absolutely one of the things that drives up suicidalities double to quadruple, sometimes even up to almost 6 times the amount of those that are not sexually active. And this is in the most recent Youth Behavior Risk Survey from data from, high school students in the United States. And yet they think that, putting more sex education and lower grades and telling the kids that everything that goes is okay, that's going to help them. That's when you get this clash of worldviews, because actually what shows is the kids that are not active, same sex makes it go even higher, right? But even heterosexual activity among the teens, that leads to double increases in suicidality. Again, it's that clash of worldview. Well, something must be wrong. We've got to tell them more and more and more that it's okay, because clearly these are pleasurable experiences. No, we're not designed for this. They're not ready for that. And so if you, sorry, I lost one point. I'm really sorry.
Why are you sorry? I'm really enjoying listening to you. But just roll over me. Go ahead.
One of the things that was striking to me as I really started to dig into the suicidality data, Okay. And so long term, one of the biggest risk factors long term for suicide risk and completed suicide is chronic health problems. And so when I look at the fact that you're doing transgender, surgeries that are going to introduce chronic health problems or have chronic implications, recurring implications, this is just maddening that you would harm the physical body of the young person for the long term. Right. Another one of the, protective factors against long-term suicidality is having children, right? The more meaning structures you have and the more meaningful relationships you have connections-wise, that actually turns out to be protective. So you're short-circuiting these built-in means in their very bodies for these young people to flourish. And you're snipping the wires and you're reconnecting things and short-circuiting those possibilities at such young ages that
it's a horror. It really is a horror. But let me ask you this: it sounds like you would be willing to say, if you believe in the Christian in the sexual ethic that Jesus himself gave us, the evidence is actually on your side. You don't have to have a kind of dissonance that if you want to say, well, whatever, I'm going to follow Jesus because I'm committed to following Jesus, you don't have to therefore reject the data, and rather your eyes might well be open to the fact that, wow, the data supports. I mean, I'm not surprised by this because I know Jesus is God, but many people might be surprised to find the data supports Jesus.
100%. 100%. I have, I have a friend. I have to get her permission, but her father was a major sex researcher, and I'm good friends with her. And he was not a Christian, did not espouse any of these values. But her husband, so his son-in-law, he told me that.
Hey, just want to briefly interrupt this interview to let you know that each weekday we go live for 2 hours to answer your questions about the Catholic faith. You can join us 3 to 5 p.m. Pacific, Monday through Friday, right here on YouTube, or find the episode after in the live tab, or you can find us on your favorite podcast platform, or just go to our Catholic Answers app. Also, be sure to like, subscribe, share, comment. Help us grow and reach more souls with the gospel of Jesus Christ.
He said, well, what if anything, what I've learned from all my study and all the data is if you want to be happy, you live like your grandparents lived. You find a person, you marry that one person, you stay married to them, and you have children.
Wow. Yeah.
And so that's the thing, is that the thing that can be compelling is if people are really willing to look at the data. Absolutely. And that's why it's so, to say disheartening is not even the word for it, to see the church and so many leaders in the church have deception come in because they're so misled, and to try to change the teaching of the church or the pastoral practice of the church that will accommodate secular humanism and sexual libertinism, which will harm the very people that they're claiming they want to help. You're betraying God, and you're betraying his people, because if the church doesn't remind the culture where the bread is found, where the living water is found, who will? And so the answer is not to have pride clubs or pride masses or pride services. The answer is to proclaim Jesus Christ and his truth. Yes, to proclaim it compassionately. So I just like it. So here's another data point that I point out. The major, we all know, and if you don't know, we should. It's touted all the time because there's value in being a victim, right? So politically, it's very politically valuable to be in a victim category. And so the mental and physical health disparities between gay and lesbian identified and homosexual, those who engage in homosexual behaviors, and the whole queer community, for whatever that's worth, there's documented for decades mental and physical health disparities between those that are not identified that way. So for heterosexuals, just for ease, right? So in the mid-1990s, the major groundwork was laid was, how are we going to create social change through science, right? We're going to pursue, and this is actually in an article, we're going to pursue an ideological agenda through our science that's going to document these disparities, but it's going to attribute the differences to minority stress. And so in the same way that accurately, yes, wrongly, there was racism and there was disparities between African Americans and people of color and white people. Civil rights happened. Thank God there were changes made. Well, we're going to borrow that civil rights model. We're going to claim that the disparities between quote unquote sexual minorities is the kind of same framework. And the problem is the oppressive, discriminatory society. And so that's been the running game for, 3 decades now at least. And so with that theory, the more accepting society becomes, and the more welcoming, and the more legal protection, and the more legal rights, then those disparities should even out. If it's coming from society's oppression, then the more that society becomes accepting, then those disparities should disappear, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't happen. Every study, decade after decade, Data from the Netherlands. There's no more society that's more welcoming, they were the first to legalize same-sex marriage. They've got decades of data. They were the first to start reporting these these disparities. Are they disappearing 10 years after same-sex marriage? No, not disappearing. No, not disappearing. So now we have data from the US, 3 generational cohorts. Are these data disparities disappearing? No, they're actually getting worse, right? Data from Australia, young women, lesbian identification or some kind of sexual minority identification leads to increase in psychological distress, despite the welcoming and acceptance of when the data was collected. It never disappears. It never changes. The minority stress theory completely fails to be borne out. And what is the researcher's response? It's always to double down. Well, this just shows the power of the heteronormative oppression. We just need to do more to dismantle the social structures that reinforce heteropatriarchy or heteronormative society. So again, without a conversion, you're going to look at the data, even though you've got decades of data.
And you're just going to find something else.
You're going to say it is still going to be, we've got to do something because they want to liberate the human person to define themselves. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. It's there. We don't just see; we see through our already the prejudices and experiences that we bring to it. So, right. I mean, the metaphor of Jesus as it's not just a metaphor. He actually makes the blind see, but it's also a metaphor. He makes those of us. He removes our blindness. All of us are afflicted. Right. So, on the one hand, it's depressing because you think, well, it doesn't matter how much data. If you are completely ideologically committed, the data won't ever mean anything that can break that. But on the other hand, Jesus is really good and really powerful, and he does reach people's hearts. He does.
Absolutely. He continues to, right? I mean, that doesn't stop. And
is this fact part of why you're like, you told me before we started talking on the microphones about this book, Lived Experience and the Search for Truth, Revisiting Catholic Sexual Morality. And I guess it's a book that's timed. It's Deborah Savage and Robert Fastiggi are the editors and authors, but you contributed a chapter to it. And but this is speaking to the church. Am I right that it's timed to be related to the synod?
Yes, yes, definitely wanting to inform those conversations because again, the synod keeps discussing, how do we pastorally minister, and not just that, but there's large, I don't know how large actually, but there's obviously contingents within church leadership that are outright rejecting millennia of teaching, of Christian teaching, saying, actually, we got the sexual morality stuff wrong. Same-sex relations should be can be loving and flourishing, and we should change the teaching, right? And so again, this volume is an excellent compilation of numerous chapters writing on all the effects of how church teaching is borne out as the truth as you look at the impact on the common good and the individual human person.
Yeah.
Right. So we have a God that desires that we have life and have life to the full. Right. And when we live within his, that doesn't mean we all have suffering. Right. But living within his, the realm of his instructions and commands, that leads to life. Right. The guardrail for the cliffside view is not to impede your enjoyment, right? It is to save your life. It is saying, you can enjoy, I have this beautiful view for you, and I want you to enjoy it to the full. But if you step beyond this bound, you're in danger of death, right? That's God's law. I want you to have life and have it to the full, but I made you. So I know how you are going to flourish. And I know actually how human society will flourish. And so if you look around the world, right, that's why no matter if they're a Christian society or not, there was still male-female marriage, right?
Yeah.
Non-Christian, you know, 5 different major, you know, religions, disagreements about God, disagreements about the nature of many things, but not a disagreement about male-female being the basic unit of society, right? So, yeah, so that's what we're trying to inform the conversation and just saying, look, realize what's at stake here. You know, what's at stake is if you compromise on these teachings, you not only abandon all of those who are struggling with that, but it affects everyone, because then it calls into question the rest of the teaching, right? If God somehow got it wrong on homosexuality, right, or the church somehow got it wrong on homosexuality, right, through the teachings of the apostles passed down, right, then what else?
It all becomes
God
liquid.
becomes completely arbitrary.
Yeah.
And again, we live in the time of the judges, right? With sexual, each man does what's right in his own eyes.
Yeah.
You know, and when you get that into the church, or even where you get this, like, okay, we're going to hold to the teaching. Yeah, it's wrong. But we're so compassionate. We know that's an impossible standard to live up to. So we're just going to, you know, walk with you and secretly celebrate your relationship. All of this is deception. And it creates such harm, because it not only harms those who are dealing with it, but again, everyone around you then starts misunderstanding, like, what is actually, well, is marriage really important? Right?
Yeah.
Because cohabitation is one of those, you know, competing, you know, simulacrums, you know, of
right.
what is actually God's intention, right? And so, yeah, I mean, cohabitation is closer to the ideal, right? But it's far more widespread. And you see in data that even Christians being raised, young people who are Christians or being raised in Christian households, half of them are planning to cohabit.
Right.
Like, and so that headline, that we're raising sexual atheists. So Jesus is Lord, and you're a disciple of Jesus, except for your sexuality, that you can't serve two masters.
Well, maybe
one of them.
I wonder if this is an unfair question. You can tell me if it is, but what do you think the Catholic universities are they bulwark against this, or do you see good things, bad things?
I live a lot in the doldrums of, like, honestly depressing. My daughter said, she called me Debbie Downer, because I always have, anecdotes of depressing data and despair. So honestly, I see a lot of harm, deception. Catholic and Christian university, I wouldn't dare send my children to.
Yeah.
Because if this ideology has taken hold, then there's too much at stake. However, and I'm not that well versed, honestly, so I'm not saying that, I can't say that across the board, but I certainly know there are many that I would not dare send them to, even though they're Christian or Catholic in name. What I want to see is actual committed leadership that understands the value. Again, and I don't want to see any kind of half-hearted kind of, mealy mouth. We are proclaiming good news for the human person. Hey, it's a battle zone out there. Hey, people are blown apart. Jesus is your refuge. His teaching can restore, his life will restore you, but that's within becoming a disciple and living within the bounds he said. Come. Yes, it's a hospital for sinners, the church. Come, be a disciple, be healed. But what I see is just compromise. There's a Protestant pastor who wrote a number of wonderful books back in the 50s, and A.W. Tozer was his name. And I remember reading this essay, The Old Cross and the New. And he wrote, the old cross invited a man to die, to come and die and follow Jesus, right? And the new cross invites a man to come and reorient his energies and his priorities under a Christian name, and honestly, that's what I
you
like.
see, that's what we're doing.
I see a lot of that.
Yeah.
Like, what does this mean that I'm going to celebrate a gay identity while I claim a Christian identity?
Yeah.
There's a conflict there. But I will say, I'm sorry. I might be Debbie Downer a lot, but I'm also the queen of rabbit trails. But back to, I do want to say that I do know one university that's doing an amazing thing, and that's University of St. Thomas in Houston.
Okay.
And they have just launched, like, yes, in this, sea of despair, not a total sea, but it's but it's a difficult terrain out there, right?
Yeah.
In this battleground. So what does the church have to say about feminism, women's rights, the personal sex and gender? Where's an authentic Christian or Catholic voice to say, this is what the church has taught. This is the beauty of the human body. This is the theology of the body, the anthropology. So responding to these cultural crises, and University of St. Thomas actually looked at it and said, yeah, we need to respond. And so Kevin Stewart at the Nesty Center for Faith and Culture, they have just launched this fall a master's in women's studies that is faithful to Catholic teaching and informing people.
That's going to tick some people off.
It's online.
Oh, okay.
Right? It's online, so it can be accessed, and people can sign up. But within that, there's a sex and gender certificate. So you take 4 courses, and so nobody has to sign up all in for the master's program. But the master's program will be wonderful, looking at what's authentic women's healthcare, right? Informed by the teaching of the church. What does that look like? Leah Jacobson, she's so incredible with her work there. So what do all these things look like? It's an amazing array, but people could just take the sampler platter of this 4-course of, anthropology, what does the church teach about human anthropology? That's the question. The question is, we can't even get past who we are to start asking once again, who is our Father, right? We're so fragmented. So anthropology, the sexual revolution, and I'm teaching the 3rd course in that series, which is on the social science of sex and gender, where I really dig into the studies and say, look, this is leading the church. Do you understand? You can't import the secular anthropology and have any hope of maintaining a biblical or Christian theology. You lose your God.
Right. It's grafting 2 things together that cannot be grafted together. One's going to die, the other one's going to live, and it's
exactly.
That's I in some of your maybe early, right? I don't know how, but I started reading in preparation for this conversation some of the things you wrote, say 10 years ago, and it does seem to me that a part of the theme was, I lived as a lesbian identified woman, and it seemed to me that you were saying I didn't get enough support of the right kind from the church, from church ministers, and you were kind of trying to push ministers to give the right, not to withdraw support, but to give a better support. What's that about?
Well, what I was actually trying to say was to encourage ministers not to compromise in some name of compassion, right? This is a false, and people don't realize, but it's hubris. They really think they can be more merciful than God, more compassionate than God. Oh, well, God said no to this, but I know how hard it is, so I'm going to come along beside you, and I'm going to support you. that's what I was seeing taken over in the church, and I was actually giving thanks that I had not experienced that, because I I after I left that relationship with the, Christian lay counselor at the church I was at, then the Lord did lead me to this wonderful, faithful, evangelical church where I had mentors that it was just a discipleship issue. Okay, we all have our issues. Oh, you deal with same-sex attraction right now. I was still dealing with it, right? You came out of lesbian identification. They didn't say, "Oh, Amy's gay," or "Oh, Amy's lesbian." The Good Shepherd calls us by name,
Yeah.
right? And that's, so I was just Amy. That's my story. Okay, come on. We're walking, and we're in Bible study and prayer, and we're trying to become more mature disciples. And what I see now is instead of that kind of model where that's a sin issue that's outside the person, it doesn't define them, right? What I see now is, well, you're, come to our, LGBT ministry night, or that's who you are, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And you stick that label on someone, and then that actually defines a trajectory for them, instead of, I was a disciple among disciples. One, we had all manner of different issues, but we were in process together. We were mid-20s, and we had faithful, wonderful, seasoned mentors, healthy married couple, beautiful, the Taylors, and they just kind of shepherded us in this motley crew. And to think that now you're having, entire ministries defined around come and support your queer child. Let's, here, you're parents of LGBT children. Those labels don't belong. We are men and women, or boys and girls. That's the only label God gave us for our identity. Child of God, male or female, right? And anything else that people are experiencing, it's a matter of maturation into a wholeness. And the church doesn't know how to do healthy discipleship a lot of times, even if you're not struggling with that. But if you import this secular category, and again, just these deceptions. So you have people in the name of ministering, supporting quote unquote gender transformation, right? That's a dualism that can't be maintained. I mean, we live in a culture where you think that you can will the good of the soul by harming the body, right? It's a division that doesn't make you cannot will the good of the human person without willing the good of the body as well as the soul. And yet we've got this division. And so there's such deception. And I think when people come under those other names that God did not give us, that were created by secular atheists, these were categories that were created, in the emergence of psychological science, the 19th century, the sex researchers from the turn of the century started out as activists wanting to change culture and wanting to change laws.
So they did research in order to have weapons in that struggle, rather than doing research.
That was kind of this baptizing of, quote unquote research. And like part of it would be surveys, surveys have always been like, God knew these practices existed. That's why he listed them out and said, don't do them. It's not like, oh, humans sometimes want to do these things. No, that we know that. That's why God said, don't do them, right? If they were not within the realm of human possibility, they would not be listed among the things absolutely to be avoided, right?
Well, do you think that the making it identity, that is, say lesbian is an identity, and then the person is labeled with that identity, everybody else accepts that identity, that person accepts that identity, there's a certain kind of hopelessness in that, then in that there a whole sections of life are cut off from that person, that there's no, like, I feel like there's, maybe you could help me with this, because I feel like there's a kind of an extreme, like pray away the gay kind of thing, which is like, almost dismissive of people's experiences and real struggles. But there's another kind of that, and these two things are opposed. That is, identity is identity. Don't try to do anything about it. And then there's not a kind of hopeful middle that says, yeah, it says to the alcoholic, yeah, you might always want that, but you don't have to drink, and you can have a sober life. It says to the person who is same-sex identified, I don't know whether you're always going to feel that way or not. I just don't know what your feelings are going to be.
Right.
But your life is open to all kinds of possibilities. Am I articulating it correctly or wrongly?
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, think about it. So currently, Gen Z young adults, 18 to 24, over 30% of them identify as somewhere under the LGBT rainbow.
Yeah.
30%. Now, if they think that having some kind of experience or, feelings or whatever is going on, think about that shutting down life possibilities. We just said that marriage is critical for society, and it's one of the greatest means and structures for human flourishing. That institution, what it leads to in terms of children, in terms of a lifelong relationship, a partner to care for you, you cannot even, marriage benefits the health in ways that are just astonishing. I remember reading, if you could put the health effects of marriage into a pill, it would be a wonder pill. Being married and cancer survival rates it outshines chemotherapy. I mean, these kinds of effects, these are the longevity, the meaningfulness, the hopefulness, and so forth. You're going to take that away? You're going to take marriage off the table and act like this is a fixed identity? This is not a fixed identity.
That's what I didn't have the words for that. Okay.
The gay rights activists have focused and hammered on immutability. Immutability. It doesn't change. It will not change. It should not change. You shouldn't try to change it. It's immutable. When you look at the research, you'll have there's a book, Sexual Fluidity in the 21st century, sexual fluidity among millennials. This kind of spectrum, the longitudinal research done that was highlighted by this Quad S. It's the Society for Scientific Study of Sexuality. So, associated with Kinsey, all of that. A couple of years ago, their award-winning article for the year was showing that there's fluidity for males and females, and there's frequent changing of identity, labels, attractions, behaviors. That's documented survey data all the way up through the late 20s. So why is the media and the culture, and with so-called conversion therapy bans, hammering over and over, it's immutable, because they want to fix a social norm into the social imaginary that you should never expect change, you should never pursue change, because we want this to be normalized. And if anybody's, you can have fluidity the other direction all you want. So you want to leave your wife or your husband and go into the gay identity, that's fine. But don't dare say that anyone, and again, it's because of a value system. You don't want to acknowledge that that's a possibility because you want it to be fixed as an equally good outcome. It doesn't matter. Oh, you're a young person, you're saying you're LGBT, that's an equally healthy, good, viable, holy alternative to saying that you're going to marry and have kids. It's absolutely false. It's, again, the Didache. There's two paths. Both of these paths don't lead to the same human flourishing. From the very most basic thing is you cannot do justice to children. You cannot have children in an outside of marital context committed for life, you've automatically are bringing them into the world in an unjust way. You're depriving them of one of their parents, at least. So there's an injustice there. That's just one thing. But again, the health outcomes, the mental health outcomes, all these things, these disparities. So it's tragic for me, because I feel like the church is in not wanting to give a false promise. Many churches are just giving no promise at all.
Oh, right.
You
That's
see what I'm saying?
wonderful
I
insight.
can't promise you. I can't promise you that you'll marry. Jesus didn't promise me that I would marry, right? But what we have to see is, like, is this objectively disordered? When I say people take such offense at teaching homosexuality is disordered, what are we talking about? Is it objectively disordered? The purpose of communication is to communicate the truth, right? So a lie is a disorder of that communication. It's not fulfilling the purpose, right? So we're not talking about people, individuals. We're talking about same-sex behavior or relationship, where that would be mimicking some kind of marital or coupling. Is that objectively disordered? Does it fulfill the purposes of the human body? Does it fulfill the purposes of reproduction? Can it possibly? No. And in fact, you look at the objective outcome and you see that it's objectively disordered, because it does grave harm in men, right? And it doesn't fulfill the potential of women, one of the greatest potentials we have, which is to bear children, right? So that objective disorder, and you're wanting to not give a person, like, why is that there? Why is it there in the first place? So for decades, it was very clear in the research, and it still is, those who experience adverse childhood experiences are much more likely, especially sexual abuse, but other kinds as well, adoption, disrupted attachment, divorce, okay, but especially sexual abuse, are much more likely to engage in homosexual behavior or to identify as gay or lesbian or something under the queer umbrella, right? Why don't we just pursue healing, right? That's what I wasn't pursuing, because I believed the cultural lie, and my attractions were so strong and had been so long standing. I didn't expect that they would ever change. I really didn't. And I didn't have any hope for that. And I wasn't attracted to men. I still had the revulsion. And so I was just going to be a faithful Christian and white knuckle it, if I had to, but I was going to strive for chastity, where the first step is celibacy, right? So I lived that for almost 10 years. But as I walked with God and got healthy, good, holy Christian counseling that didn't say, oh, you're lesbian and that's what you're going to be, so let's just, no, all I did was walk with people who knew and prayed, knew the Lord and prayed for me. And they didn't pray the gay away, but they prayed for healing.
Yeah, right.
Right? Because why? Because you know what? It would be wonderful if you could have healthier female friendships where you didn't have to withdraw because you're too emotionally attached and you get entangled. So lessening my same-sex attraction was going to help me flourish, whether I ever married or not. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, let's get your friendships healthier, because a healthy female friendship is side by side. You're interested in the same thing. That's healthy friendship. You're not locked into a gaze one-on-one where it's not open to other relationships. It gets overly enmeshed and jealous or whatever. I didn't have healthy friends. I was lesbian. I was very isolated. Then I was lesbian identified in college. Then I went to get help at the Bible church, and then became enmeshed with a woman twice my age for 5 years. That was my formation. Yeah. My 20 to 25, the finishing of my, frontal lobe development, all of that maturation was under the shadow of this enmeshed, disordered relationship. So I came for my graduate studies. I didn't know how to do healthy female friendship. I was 100% same sex attracted, had no openness to men, and had never dealt with the wounds of sexual abuse and, adoption. Obviously, that's a wound that continues. So I was absolutely a mess. I was at the wonderful, church, and I was trying to follow the Lord, but I was absolutely a mess. And I had just been separated from this, woman who'd been, we had stopped the sexual activity in the first, 5 months of our relationship. But again, for the next 4 years, that woman defined my whole reality. And so I was a mess. And so a friend said, Amy, have you ever heard of healing prayer? And I said, no, but I need it.
You just
And
knew.
yeah, I mean, like, I am a mess. And that opened up a whole wealth of having the Lord, praying. It's not praying, it was praying with precision. Lord, have mercy on Amy. Lord, these wounds. Whether I ever married, don't you think it's good for the body of Christ if I could get over a hatred and a revulsion of my brothers because of wounds that have been done, abuses that have been done to me? How is this not something that we should all strive for? And there's instead of just labeling me as lesbian and that's it. And now follow Jesus and as your lesbian self. No, that identity and those attractions come from somewhere. So no matter what the journey entails, walking with Jesus makes you, if you open your heart in community and in discipleship, he starts touching those places, So whether I ever married or not, it was a really healthy thing when I could start interacting with my brothers as brothers and I could trust them. And it was just amazing, and have people pray for me, Lord, the lies that she believed about you as a father, that you weren't there for her, you didn't comfort her. Holy Spirit, show her where you were when the abuse happened. Show her how you're ministering to her. I mean, the Lord did amazing things. I got to, in my relationships with women, I got to have friendships where that attraction didn't come and mess everything up. You see what I'm saying? I mean, this was just becoming whole. And you could become whole enough to where then, like, oh my gosh, whoa, what was that? I was really drawn to that guy up there playing that guitar, singing that song at church. We had an open mic night, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've never experienced, like, what is this? And it opens up that potential. And that potential leads to the fact that I have 2 daughters, and a wonderful husband that I never could have imagined. But in this place of wanting to make sure that we express that we're welcoming and open and compassionate to the LGBT identified, we're not even challenging that label that is a false reality, and that does curtail future possibility. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. It's so beautifully expressed. And as you're saying it, I'm thinking, in a certain sense, it's very particular. It has to do with your childhood experiences, these traumas, living a life, identifying yourself as lesbian. But in another way, it's just not particular at all. It's universal. Like, I talked to a lot of men who they don't believe they will ever get out of the trap of pornography. They don't.
Right.
They don't believe it themselves that they can.
Right.
And you want to say, yes, like that's exactly the work that the Lord does every day. Like, he's on the job. He does that work every day. Like, this is not a new thing for him.
Right.
But so it has a kind of universal aspect to it as well. That and it's striking to me that it starts for you, or the kind of tipping point into where the healing begins, is to know God as God, to have that lightning experience where, I suppose for different people it would be different how God reaches us, but the quieting of the neediness and the opening to I'm getting the relationship right now. You're God. That's a really good starting place.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think that we have to get reminded of that a lot of times, especially when we're in our pain,
Yeah.
right? And so
Right.
he's very compassionate, right? I'm right there with you, but we have to get the order right. Like C.S. Lewis, we have to get God out of the dock. He's not the one on trial here,
Yeah.
and yet we can be dishonest in that process. So yeah, I think it's just a real shame, and it's more than a shame. Honestly, it's a devastating deception that infects churches when they don't, because when you accept those category labels as definitive of the human person, you've accepted an anthropology that is absolutely in direct opposition to Christian truth and teaching.
So when did it become clear to you that I mean, you've stressed, the two ways, the way of life and the way of death. When did it become clear to you that there were two ways? Because there is the kind of, and I think that, again, there's this very particular in your case. Okay, this is how it went, but it's also I think the universal experience to some degree, or very close to a universal experience of young Christians today, of how can I have both what the world says and what Jesus says? There's a meshing here where, don't be so hung up. That's the world's message, and Jesus' message is He loves me. Okay, I can probably find some way to jam these things together.
Right.
When
Right.
it's important to come to the moment where you go, no, there's two ways.
Right.
And
Right.
and this,
Yeah.
if I could say something to you that I noticed decades ago, in that the beginning of the Didache, there's two ways: the way of life and the way of death, and there's much difference between the two. That's the next line.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it occurred to me, the reason that the apostles say there's much difference between the two is you don't notice that there's much difference between the two. That's the part that you have to see, is these are not
Right.
the same path. So I want to know, when do you start to see, no, these are two separate paths?
Right. Well, yeah, that's a great question. For me, I I was raised, in a faithful Baptist church, so I heard the gospel. I knew that Jesus was the Savior, and so I knew that, but through the abuse, I just became this suicidal, mass of a teenager that was just extremely confused. So when the same-sex attraction emerged, I was just at a loss, and I'm trying to explain that I did have a genuine conversion to Christ when I was just about to turn 16, and part of that came through my suicidality with. When I wore a tux to the Christmas dance at high school, it was like all the wounds that had been quietly festering, they just erupted for everyone to see. So I had cut my hair off, and I was 15, and I wore a tux, and that was 1985. Nobody did that, and so the whole school concluded I was gay, and I totally felt gay. I wanted to take a girl for my date, and I was just that was terrifying for me in 1985. And so in 1986, it was Christmas dance that I did that. I thought, well, I've got to, again, talk about, you're in the church, but you're not being discipled. So you're hearing you're in Sunday school and stuff, but there's not, open relationship where you're actually being discipled in ways that you need. So I was alone and scared and couldn't bear to admit to anyone that I was dealing with same-sex attraction. So what do? You get you create a plan, and Satan's whispering in your ear, right? So I was like, well, if I sleep with a guy, then I'll prove that I'm not gay, and if I get a boyfriend, then everybody will think I'm not gay, and I won't, is that kind of thing. So that obviously produced genuine guilt and just horrible experiences and more shame. So I was just at a suicidal crisis. I mean, I was ready to end it all. But as I was making those plans, my church got a new pastor and a pastor and his wife, and so there was this newness of this, and she kind of pursued me in relationship, and I was like, what is that fragrance? Something's drawing me, and it wasn't attraction. It was the fragrance of Christ. I mean, there was like and I had faithful people in the youth group. Don't think that I didn't have a wonderful friend named Becky who was praying and stuff, but there was just something God used her to break through. So I was like, I really had this conversion to Christ. And I thought when I came to Christ, I'm a new creature, right? Old things are passed away. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Old things have passed away, new things have come, right? So I thought that all my same-sex attraction and everything, all that was going to be done away with.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to walk with Jesus, and I'm excited because Jesus has changed my life. And the wounds were still there. I needed discipleship. The process of becoming new had begun, but I didn't have, any idea how to ask for help. Well, this was also 1986. And so what was happening was there was more and more cultural push, media push for gay rights, right? And so that was infiltrating more and more into media. And so my pastor, whom I really loved, my pastor decided to preach on it a couple of months after my conversion. And he was right in wanting to educate the congregation and to speak the truth on it. But I have to say, and he's in process too, he was a young preacher. This was new times, but I didn't hear the love. I heard truth, but not the love. And I remember that was a Sunday night sermon. And he said, all these gays coming out of the closet, I wish they'd just go back in, and he gave an altar call, and that night we could have sung 50 verses. No one was coming down for that altar call. And even like on the second verse, he was like, no, y'all can come on down here. Nobody's going to think that you're struggling with that or dealing with that. And I was sitting there as a new Christian, 16 years old. And I'd been a lifelong member of the church, and I was just kind of sinking lower in the pew. So I really do understand, like, we have to speak on this compassionately, but that's not to take the truth out, and I'm sure he's at a different place too. Like, how do you speak the truth in love, right? So all I'm saying, I set up that story just to say that I only knew from them that I had to suppress it and to hide it. And I had nowhere to go with it. And so when I went to college, I had struggled so long and so hard. And I'm not giving myself an excuse, but in my sinfulness, I said, that's it. I'm out of here. Mm-hmm. And I left, walked away from God and walked straight into the arms of a woman. But I knew at the time, my conscience was clear. This is not truth. This is not, the Holy Spirit's conviction was clear. I was having enjoyable experiences, but it's very clearly my body is designed for heterosexuality. That no matter the amount of pleasure you can have, whatever your body is not designed for this kind of sexual activity. So I had that war kind of going on in me, but I was very rebellious. And I'm not laughing about the rebellion, but I'm just saying, like, I was gonna, I was like, I'm free. I finally can be who I am. I'm, I had several, relationships with women, and then a breakup, and I had this. I have an article that's coming out in 2 weeks at What We Need Now, and so I talk about this. But I had a breakup, and I kind of was at that point, like, am I going to really continue to build a lesbian life? What about God? And I remember opening the scriptures to read Romans 1. I hadn't opened my Bible in a long time, and I read it. And I genuinely, I said, Lord, if it's wrong, you're going to have to show me another way, because I can't see it, because it felt so natural to me. Mm-hmm. Right? And I had tears in my eyes. I remember the, tears falling on the Bible, and I couldn't see it. Well, when you engage in sin, you open yourself to deception, but a deception really had entered me. And so suddenly I was confused about what I wasn't really confused about. what I wanted was a different answer than the one God had given.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
I wanted these things to be okay. But I set my, I was like, okay, I'm still, I'm lesbian and that's it. So at the same time, I began the search for my birth mother. And God used this experience of, it was wild. I mean, it was back in the time, this was 1990 by this point. And I literally saw a little, I don't know, I don't even know where I saw it, but it was like in the back of some newspaper, a little adoption reunion. What do they call it? Classified ad.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so there was a woman, and I was in Denton, and there was a woman in Irving who facilitated adoption reunions, because I had gone to the home, the Buckner Baptist home had put me up for adoption. And I had gone to get any information I could get. And she said, I make people wait until they're 21. The caseworker that had placed me was still there. And she said, I make people wait until they're 21. But if you'll write me a letter for your mother, I will contact her. I'll make one contact when you're 21. Well, I wasn't willing to wait. So I sent that letter, but then I was like, no, I have to find her. And so I contacted this lady named Pat, and she did the adoption reunions. And so she said, listen, am I giving you too much detail here?
No.
So you have 3 courts. There's 3 courts in Dallas that do adoptions. And you have 3 possibilities. You need to find out which court, your adoption was finalized in. And there's 3 judges. One judge will not open your records no matter what. The other judge, you will have to make a personal appeal. So you'll have to come to court, and he may or may not open your records. And if you're in the 304th court, that judge believes you have the right to know who you are, and you only have to send in a certified request.
Wow!
And
you got in that court.
I was placed in the 304th court. So I wrote, and I got a court order, and I came down to Austin. I had to present it at the Bureau of Vital Statistics, and I was finally going to find my birth mother. Well, the night before, I was out at lesbian bars, and I was walking downtown Austin, and I just kind of yelled out, I was like, I love this life, and nothing's ever going to make me give it up. And my sister said, it's almost like heaven said, challenge accepted, because it was really a matter of weeks. So the next morning I went and I got my birth mother, my original birth certificate, found out my birth mother's name. And the lady named Pat was so efficient. I remember I gave her $50 and to do the search. And she said, and if I incur any long distance charges for the telephone, then, you'll pay this. It's just so dated now, everything with the internet, but she had found her through a marriage record within like a week. And long story short, I didn't get a warm welcome. And I understand now my mother was overwhelmed and married with young children herself. But instead of, oh, I've waited for this call, it was, oh, I've dreaded this day. And so that rejection was so stunning and such a blow that I cried for literally a week. I cried from the moment I got up to the moment I went to sleep. I was taking 9 hours in summer school at the University of North Texas, and I would drive to class crying, walk to class crying, sit in the back, tears falling. I don't know how you cry that much, but that was just, and so I cried for a week. But finally, it was like I realized, like, I've got to come home. Like, God, I'm in the far country, and I need to be brought home. And so that blow just kind of cracked me open, like C.S. Lewis says, through the megaphone of pain, and same-sex relationship with a woman wasn't going to fill me. My mother wasn't going to fill me. Only God could fill me. And you can't willfully be in rebellion and live in the far country and have the pleasures of the Father's house and no intimacy with him at the same time, because sin brings that division and separation, which is always what he's trying to restore. So I just had to come home. right?
Did you
So
know
he
where to
brought me
go?
home.
Did you know where to go to come home?
Well, he brought me home. And I knew his embrace. And then that's when I went to the church, and sadly was, seduced. But that came several months later. In that interim period, what God had made clear to me again was that there's not an option here. So I wanted to come home, but I had imbibed the cultural lie that lesbian is who I am. Right. And so I genuinely wrestled for a couple of weeks, and I was like, I want to repent, but how do you repent from who you are? If I am a lesbian, right, how do I leave that behind? Because how do you leave yourself behind? I know you die to yourself, but how do you leave it? And so I was so confused, and during that time, I saw this TV program, and it was on gay rights, but there was this sliver, because you always have to deal with the religious sliver, right? They're always wanting to overcome or to shame or to, settle the religious question, because that's the only thing that stands in the way of the human liberation, right? The only thing that stands in the way is the church or the God that would say, no, this is the way, walk in it, not the way you're wanting to go. And so there was Christians on there that were saying they were leaving their homosexual lives behind to follow Christ. Well, I'd never heard of that. Again, my Baptist church experience, you just silenced it, suppressed it. I'd never heard of such a thing. And of course, they were being portrayed as fools, right? The other thing that I noticed, again, is that it was all based on textual. Like, so one man, he was really racked with, struggle. And his Bible was very warm, but it was like there was no witness other than the Bible. Of course, I didn't understand this at the time, but now looking back, it's like the witness of the human body. God has been clearly understood through what has been made. That's what's missing when people are just trying to look at the authoritative scriptures, but try to find a way out of those scriptures. All of creation is declaring the other witness is here in the theology of the body. But all that to say that I was looking so intently, I was like, oh my gosh, they have Bibles and they're talking about homosexuality in church. What is this? But the interviewer was very impatient, and he was like, come on. He was talking to one woman. Come on, all this God stuff, but be honest, right now, if you had to choose, who would you choose to be with, a man or a woman? And she just looked at him and she said, I choose Jesus. And I mean, it was like, if it had been a movie, there would have been music and
this is the moment.
Coming down from heaven, because it was like, oh, I can do that. That's what I can do. It's not about, am I homosexually attracted, heterosexually attracted? It's about following Jesus. Right now, 100% of me would choose to be with a woman, and I can't imagine that ever changing. But I can follow Jesus. I choose Jesus, and I will submit my life, including my sexuality, to him. And that made all the difference. That was my choice. And then again, because thankfully this deception hadn't entered the church and it wasn't so strong in the culture, these labels were not placed on me. And so the people were just walking with me.
Well, how did you discover the theology of the body then? How did you come to discover that?
Well, that was 20 years later, So it's like 16 years later. I'm just saying that when I did my dissertation, on evangelical Christians who were dealing with, their personal life narratives of how they negotiated those conflicts between their sense of their sexual identity and their spiritual or faith identity. And in that is the first time I realized, again, how it seemed like there was just such not enough reliance or not enough understanding that there's a second, there's a witness. Again, all of creation, and especially the theology of the body, is an incarnational witness to this word. The scriptures, and we have the scriptures, and we have the word made flesh, and so that came later. But yeah.
Do you think that that's a language that we can use in speaking with the world? Like to say, because a lot of times people respond to Christians like, well, like it's I this is a very immature one, but you get it regularly. Well, the book of Deuteronomy says you can't eat shellfish, and it says you can't have homosexual relationships. So, but you eat shellfish. What's your problem? That this is kind of low level Bible criticism, more or less trying to make the whole thing seem ridiculous. Whereas listening to you, I'm thinking, well, the response doesn't have to come from the Bible. The response can come from a wider kind of, I don't know if you would call it natural law or philosophical or incarnational.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, I would say it is the natural law. I mean, that's the thing, is like, how can we appeal? Well, because people are made in the image of God, and there's a law written on the heart. There is a law written on the heart. And so no matter how much you try, that's why no matter how much society tries to, recomport itself to say these are equally valid, equally healthy, equal outcomes, they are not, because they violate the design of the human person and the intentions of the Creator. And again, we have the law written on the heart. That doesn't go away. That's what makes every man and woman culpable before God. I loved. I was reading. I think it was Andrew Walker, an article at Public Discourse, but I don't remember if that was who it was. But he said there's no category for atheism really in the Bible. There's only people who suppress the truth. There's really only a suppression of what is evident, clearly evident before our eyes, with our idolatry and our atheism and so forth. And so if you're trying to make these certain practices, you're warring against your own self. And so that's the argument. But the other thing is that people so often talk, oh, you focus too much on pelvic issues. How do you comport that with the words of our Lord? How do you look at Scripture? There are no pelvic issues. There's only heart issues. Jesus said, what comes out of the heart, that's what produces adulteries, fornications, murder, hatred. It's a heart issue. It's ridiculous to kind of say, oh, you're sexually, you're fixed on sexuality. With the dietary laws, there was a clear, different revelation given with the influx of, the wonderful mystery of God, the Jews and the Gentiles. Arise, Peter, kill and eat. Oh, Lord, I've never eaten anything unclean. You know what? In order to obey me, I'm telling you to arise, kill and eat, because I'm giving you a new revelation of humanity that I'm calling all people to myself. The Jewish Messiah is for all people. Right? So there's a new revelation given for this human flourishing, where the two different groups are going to be made one in Christ, right? And so look at that, look at the difference, right? But what do you see through the rest of the New Testament? Every single letter, every single epistle, every single gospel, all the way up until Revelation, sexual immorality is 100% mentioned over and over and over in each single instance. It's so strong because it captures the heart. We're meant for God. We are the bride of Christ. To have a different lover, to have a different sexual partner than what he ordained will draw you away from him greater than anything else. Like Paul said in 1 Corinthians 6, every other sin a man commits is outside his body, but the immoral man sins against his own body. You tell me, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, that equates our sanctification with the first thing, abstaining from sexual immorality, because you can't have a divided heart, and you can't take the members of your body and engage in all manner of sexual practice, no matter what it is, and still be unified in your walk with Christ. It brings too much division. You are a bride of Christ, meant to be purified, washed clean with the water and the word, being prepared for God. Nothing devastates the heart like having immoral relationships. And obviously it devastates the families when it's, adulterous or now polyamorous. I mean, where does it end?
It doesn't
So it
seem to
sets
have an
the
end. It doesn't seem to have any
it
logical
doesn't
end.
it doesn't that's the plus, and that's actually in some of the academic articles. Is like the plus is for any possible future identity or relationship configuration or sexual practice that we come up with. Um, so there is no end, and the only answer is that the human heart be submitted to the infinite loving God who created it for itself, for himself. So, yeah.
Well, praise God.
Wow.
I'm not gonna ask you anymore because that is a
You know
perfect
what?
place to leave
Because
it.
it's been 2 hours.
Has it been 2 hours? Really? I didn't even realize we'd been going 2 hours. I have to say, my original anxiety, I still have it because I feel like I have a million more questions. There's a million things in my notes I didn't get to. But it's just a wonderful conversation with you. I've just enjoyed it so much.
Thank you.
I think your life is just so. It's. I mean, I'm sure it's very nice for you, but it's very helpful to the rest of us. In that, I'm sure you're enjoying your life, but the combination of practical experience and theoretical insight, academic ability. Really makes it very, very powerful witness. So I'm just so grateful I got to meet with you and talk with you. Thank you for taking the time to do it with us.
Oh, thank you, Sai. I'm very, very blessed and honored. Thank you for listening and having this conversation with me.
I hope you'll be willing to do it again because I'm serious. I got like a million more questions on here.
I'd be happy to do it again.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Amy Hamilton. AmyHamilton.org you can go to find your materials. Lots of stuff there. I want to mention the book again, Lived Experience and the Search for Truth, Revisiting Catholic Sexual Morality. It's out September 2024. Amy's one of the authors in there. Lots of wonderful authors in there. And then you also mentioned the University of St. Thomas. I'm going to give them another shout out. A women's study. What is it called? A women's studies master's?
Yeah, it's a master's in women's and gender studies, something like that. So,
all right.
I'm sorry. The sexuality and gender certificate is what is part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So those courses would be part of the master's, but that's why I'm like, what is that exactly? But go to their website and you can find it. So
I feel like we had you on before everybody had you on their podcast. I feel like we're always going to be like, we were one of the first to have you on. So thanks for doing it with us.
Oh, thank you, Sai. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much. God bless you.
You too. Thank you. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this Catholic Answer, be sure to like, subscribe, and check out our live streams Monday through Friday, 3 to 5 p.m. Pacific. Or find the episode after on YouTube, your favorite podcast platform, or our Catholic Answers app.